Okay, so I'm reading this off a smartphone, and in fact, it's funny, I went to Metatron reading, and that was the first time that I'd ever seen poets reading their work off smartphones. So it's probably not unusual for you, but for me it sure was. So.
Which reading was it?
It was a Blue Met reading.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That was our most recent one.
Okay. So Ashley Obscura is a Canadian-Mexican writer, publisher, and editor. She's the author of the poetry collections Ambient Technology and I Am Here, Metatron 2014, and 4 digital poetry projects, LIGHGHT, How to Be a Rainbow, Aura Halo, and O Inverted Universe. The founder and managing editor of Metatron Press, Obscura currently lives in Montreal, Quebec, where she holds a Bachelor of Arts in creative writing and professional writing. Ambient Technology was shortlisted for Fence's Modern Poets Prize in 2017, and Obscura was anthologized as one of Canada's 30 under 30 poets. Her poetry has been anthologized in the United States and has been translated and published in Spain, Mexico, Argentina, Peru, and Romania. She was recently the scriptwriter for Museum of Symmetry, a surreal virtual reality experience produced by the National Film Board of Canada. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you. Hi.
You were born in Saskatchewan.
I was born in Saskatchewan. I was born in Saskatoon, land of the living skies.
Did you grow up there?
I did. Yeah, I lived there until I was 19. And then I came and visited Montreal. I had a couple friends that had moved here, and I just didn't want to leave. I came and had a great time and, experienced, got a little taste of what, it feels like to live in a city that is very multicultural, and I was just like, I need to be here. So I applied to get into the creative writing program at Concordia, which I did, and then I came here. But yeah, my life did start in the prairies.
I was ripped out of England at age 12 by my parents and taken to Saskatoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and lived there until I was 22.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful place.
It is, and it's a great university. I went to university there. Clean living.
Yeah.
And, I understand that it's got a pretty vibrant cultural life.
Yeah, I would say it's cultural. I wouldn't say it's multicultural.
No, it's, from my experience, was pretty white bread.
Yeah, and that was my experience too. And I guess I think that when I look back at growing up in Saskatoon, I think that there's something about the skies out there. Like growing up being young and the big open space, I feel like I developed this ability to be a ridiculous dreamer or something. You know what I mean? There was just all this open space and just so much space for you to imagine something else.
I can relate to that. One of the strongest memories I have of Saskatoon is during the winter. Mm-hmm. When I was walking to school, high school, and it was so cold that you could hear the traffic that was about, at least a mile and a half away, as if it was right next to you. That's right. How cold it was. I'll never, ever forget that.
Yeah.
But that's not the reason you left. The cold wasn't the reason you left. It was just Montreal's multicultural vibe.
Yeah, it was definitely Montreal as a city, and also as a person. I really wanted to be in a space where I could grow into who I am, who I thought I could be, and I didn't feel like socially there was much for me in Saskatoon, or even.
What does that mean? Couldn't find a decent boyfriend or girlfriend?
No, I think it just means there wasn't a super vibrant literary scene there that I really felt like I identified with. And I was really interested in exploring being a writer, and there just weren't many opportunities there for me to do that.
Sure.
I think from the very get-go, I've really always craved like a literary community more than anything. So, and like we can get into that, but that's a lot about what Metatron is all about. Because when I came out to Montreal and studied, I found that there was no community at Concordia. If anything, there was a sort of culture that I didn't really feel included in, I guess.
At Concordia?
Yeah, at Concordia. I'm sure you read about it a little bit in the news recently.
Hard not to.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of the people implied in that were actually my professors. I wasn't, directly affected by that. Well, I was directly affected, but not in like an explicit way, but just culturally it just seemed very closed doors. There was no opportunities to do any readings. There was no...
Because you didn't get sexually involved with the gatekeepers?
Yeah. It's like if you didn't stroke their egos, then you weren't really like included in whatever connections they had. Yeah. So I kind of, graduated in that climate, and I was still very determined to get my own work out there. And there were a bunch of people around me whose work I was super interested in too. And I was just like, well, if no one else is going to do it, I guess I will.
I've read a few interviews that you've given over the past couple of years. And one of them, I really liked what you said. And maybe it has some application to what you've just said. The people who don't believe in you are also important too, because their doubt is good ammunition to prove them wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, there's a certain thing to be said of when you don't feel like you belong in a space. There's two routes you can go. You can either, give up and be like, I guess there's no space for me, or you can... be like, create your own space is actually very much what I feel like I've done. I've created...
You've done more than create space, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a lot. I mean, I've done books, done 50 readings. There's been like the digital component as well. So
the website and the blog?
Yeah, like the blog, and, now it's the digital magazine. So yeah, I guess, what would you say? What else have I done other than create space?
Well, you've created books. Mm-hmm. You've created a digital presence. You've created a community. Mm-hmm. I guess space is a place for people to come. Is that how you're defining space?
Yeah, I guess I'm really interested in like the idea of space because it's just like when I started, there was no alternative culture specifically in Canada for like this new form of literature that was coming out, that was informed by the internet. This is like the first generation that is, post-digital, growing up with the internet, like writing and sharing their work on the internet. So it's kind of like the first like digital poetry. It's like the first, series of digital poets. And interestingly enough, in my last year at Concordia, I happened upon this Facebook group called Alt-Lit Gossip, which has a bizarre name, but pretty much it was this community of hundreds of young writers who were starting, like, self-publishing their own ebooks and starting their own publishing presses and starting their own digital, like, magazines, doing readings, live streaming those readings. And it was like these, I was really inspired by this community because they didn't need permission from anyone to exist. You know what I mean? Because on the internet, space is unlimited,
Yeah. So you've really got the freedom to produce something that could theoretically be seen by a whole bunch of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had this amazing freedom with, I mean, I attribute everything I've been able to do, you know, besides from my own will and drive, but because of, you know, the internet and also like access to affordable digital programs that allow you to, you know, learn how to like lay books out and, you know, and then all the promotion that you can do online. Given my resources, I would have never been able to establish a press, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah. There are lower barriers to entry for you, for this generation, than ever before.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the challenge is creating something like sustainable, though, because on the internet everything is so vapid, right? So that's where I think the books are so important, just because there's still like this tradition of publishing, but
it's kind of a lovely irony, I think. Really.
Yeah.
You talked about the space, and well, let's start with the fact that you got going by forming a community reading series. This is happening whether you like it or not. That's how it began, right?
Yeah, that's how it all began. It was my last year at Concordia, kind of around this time that I discovered the alt-lit gossip group and kind of saw what they were doing. I had a friend in the program that I met who became a great ally of mine for a couple of years named Guillaume Morissette, who's a local writer, and we were just like, let's just like throw reading, you know? And there was a guy in our class who had a loft that he lived in, and we invited a bunch of people from our program. I think there was 10 of us there, and we all just sat around drinking and sharing our poetry with one another. You know, for the second one, we decided to make a Facebook event, and we invited a bunch of people, and, you know, and then from then, like, and it just seemed like immediately there was like a lot of people coming to our readings. It was like, because there was a huge lack at that time in Montreal of readings being organized by people in their 20s.
Right.
And I think that, you know, the literary readings that did exist were, you know, a lot more traditional in that they were taking place in bookstores and were very like quiet. And the readings we were doing were a lot, especially at the beginning, like kind of wild, and, you know, it was kind of like a happening. You know, I'd say it's more like a happening that we were tapping into. I think
people were quiet so they could listen to the poetry, no?
People would be quiet and like to listen to the poetry, yes, but that was a challenge. Like, I think my intention was always just I wanted poetry to be I've always thought poetry is like the coolest thing, right? And I really wanted to create an environment where people could realize that poetry wasn't this inaccessible, like archaic thing, because I think people have had a lot of preconceptions about what poetry was. You know, and the people that I was working with and featuring at these readings were writing in a new style that was really engaging and of the here and now, and
what
very
was
relatable.
That style?
Well, it was like, I mean, this is a good example, like Jay Ritchie. So this is like a line I opened from a book that's on the table.
Sure.
Like a line, I wait to pay for my discounted bottle of Fructis 2-in-1 shampoo conditioner. A team of construction workers swing sledgehammers at Zeller's family restaurant booth. The woman ahead of me with shelving units in her cart haggles the price of the floor tiles. And I wonder, am I attractive enough to be in a shampoo commercial? So, you know, it's like, it's just kind of, it's poetry of the everyday. You know, it's poetry that references contemporary life, and, you know, and it's very curious about the self that exists in this kind of world. That is just like a little example.
But you saw this as sort of not a trend, but a type of poetry that was coming out of your millennial group?
Yeah, I kind of...
A genre, almost?
Exactly, yeah. I sensed that there was like this new, I don't know if I want to say genre, but there was this new style of writing that was emerging from these, you know, post-internet millennials that was very different. And it didn't seem that there was much space, back to the space, or interest in people publishing that work from the industry.
So in other words, you, again, to put it in sort of crass commercial terms, you saw that there was some sort of a niche that could be filled by
Yeah, I don't think I saw that at the time.
Okay.
I think it was it was like intuitive. I didn't really know what I was doing. When I started the press, we did 6 books to start, printed 100 copies of each one, and I thought that was going to be it. But then there was immediately this great interest from writers, from bookstores, from people all over who were super excited about.
So what did you do? Did you take these around to bookstores and ask them to sell them for you? Or did you just put it on the internet and say, here they are?
The way it worked originally was we did this fantastic launch in this old bathhouse. So we sold our original copies at the launch. And then I was like really shy, and I was, it was kind of my dream to get our books in Drawn and Quarterly, which is just down the street. And they actually reached out to me like the day after the event and were like, we would love to have your books. And I was, I was so shy. I was like, I don't want to like bother you guys, but like, and then they've become like, they sell our books really great at that location now. But anyway, so people were coming to me, and there was also, I had made an online store simultaneously.
What, so Shopify or something like that?
It was originally on Big Cartel, which is, just one of those where you can just have like a few products, and it's very simple. And then we shifted to Squarespace eventually.
Okay.
So originally it was just people from the community, friends and family of the writers, and then, like a few bookstores that were interested in us. So
how did you choose the first 6?
The first 6 books were...
And what were they? Let's have a look, because I'm a book collector. I'm super interested in those first 6.
Yeah, so these ones. I'm pulling, for anyone listening, I'm just pulling them off the table.
Okay.
So these were the first 6.
I'll take a photograph of those. Okay.
Yeah. So we have Ali Pinckney's Tampion, who was a peer of mine at Concordia. Roland Pemberton's Magnetic Days, who was a friend of mine, isn't a student of poetry. He actually comes at it from, he's a rapper, but he was also the poet laureate of Edmonton for a while. Jay Ritchie, who was also a peer of mine. Matthew E. Duffy, who was a friend, like a very eccentric friend of mine. His book is the most experimental book we've ever put out.
Okay.
And then Laura Broadbent interviews, which eventually, part of that book is now in a Coach House book that she has out called In on the Great Joke. Of course, I put out my book as well because, as much as I was interested in supporting the people around me and the people I felt were very worthy of having a first collection, which I realized through doing multiple readings that they would come out, and it was clear to me they had a lot of material. So as much as I was interested in supporting the people around me, I also wanted to support myself too, because I was also struggling to get my work out there as well.
It's interesting you should say that, because I recently interviewed the founder of the Ambient Press out in San Francisco, and his first book, was his own book of poetry and sketches. And so obviously that was an important driver for you. This was a way for you to get your material out, your creation out.
Yeah, but I think I realized at that time, if I wanted to get my own work out, I needed to create like the conditions for that work to exist, and I was never interested in doing
legitimacy,
it alone.
You mean?
Maybe, I don't know if legitimacy is the right word, but I was never, I guess I've always just been interested in community, and if I were to just have put my book out, I feel like that would have been lonely. Like I wouldn't have been able to, I don't know, tap into that which I've been able to tap into.
Well, again, this is sort of a commercial comparison, but for me, the best time I've ever had, the most money I've ever made, is when I've done it with a couple of people who have became really good friends of mine. So we celebrated together, we had a ball together, and it was way more fun than going it on my own.
Yeah, it's a currency, It's when I started the press, I was living on welfare. I didn't have any money. And so the people I knew and like my friendships were like the greatest wealth in my life. And, you know, I cherish that. And I still, you know, I still cherish that.
You picked basically people that you knew, friends whose work you respected. Is that pretty well how?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The response sounds to me like it was terrific.
Yeah.
Pretty early on.
Yeah. I immediately felt very welcomed.
Mm-hmm. So then what? What was the next step?
Oh, it's all such a blur now.
And when was this?
This was in 2014.
Okay.
So that would have been the spring of 2014. And then the next step was, after those books came out, I got a bunch of emails from people I kind of knew that were wondering if I'd be interested in publishing their books. So that's when the submissions kind of started happening, because at first it was solicited, and then I started getting these submissions, which ended up with these books right here.
Okay.
This is this one. But,
so this is where you got to start using your judgment.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, after that there was, I'd say I probably got maybe 30 submissions, chose 5 of them, and then from then on, like, our submissions have gotten, like, I get so many submissions, and that's...
How many is so many?
I'd say, like, we do open reading periods, like, once or twice a year, but I'd say, like, 500 manuscripts a year.
All lengths and shapes
yeah,
and sizes?
all over the place.
Okay.
You know, and that's been interesting for me, because when I started, it was a response to what I felt was an inaccessibility of, you know, literary presses to be, you know, better at communicating and more open and transparent.
You mean the literary presses that you had approached felt inaccessible? Is that what
Yeah.
you mean? Yeah.
And I was also like I was really interested in working in publishing, and I really wanted like an internship.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, I emailed every publisher on the East Coast of Canada post-graduation, and, you know, didn't even hear back like, thank you for your application, you know, and I just felt, you know, so I really wanted to create something that was accessible.
So you basically said, screw you, I'm going to do my own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. It's like, watch me.
Yeah. Well, that gets back to our quote, doesn't it? Their doubt is good ammunition to prove them wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's like some sort of power in not...
Anger. There's good power in anger.
Yeah, exactly. So like the passion for the literature, and then the anger that, yeah, I just didn't feel like I was ever going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that was what has kept me going.
That's interesting, because I interviewed Adam Gopnik, the New Yorker critic, not that long ago, and he made a sort of pronouncement on your generation, saying that their ambition wasn't quite as vaunted as my generation's ambition in the 80s. What's your take on that?
Well, it's really quite hard to say. I think in the 80s, it's safe to say that there were more financial resources. You know, I think my generation is plagued with, you know, not having many financial resources. We do have, you know, digital resources now, which is a whole different currency. In terms of ambition, I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to be ambitious in this world. I think, you know, I can speak personally, like there's just so many issues that the world is plagued by right now, you know, and it just seems, I know, yeah, you can like feel kind of stuck sometimes.
Yeah.
But complacency never gets you anywhere, you know, and I think I was really lucky to meet some incredible people in the beginning of this process who were very ambitious. This is more in the music world. I had like a lot of friends in the music world who, you know, eventually got to a certain level of success, but it was only through their ambition, you know, like blind ambition, insisting on the work and doing a good job at it. But I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question.
My daughter, who's your age, I think, or
I'm
thereabouts.
30.
Okay,
Yeah.
she's not your age. She's about 6 years younger. She suggests that that it's a different kind of ambition and that success is defined in a different way. Maybe settling for the fact that there isn't the kind of money and wealth around that there used to be. But there's more of a balanced view of what success might mean.
Right. I think that's a really good point, actually. I think our generation has totally different ideas of what success is. I think a lot of my peers and myself are in this position where we know that the valuable work that needs to be done on this earth isn't necessarily valuable, like economically.
Yeah. It's not valued.
It's not valued, exactly. But we know it's so important to do. You know what I mean? I think that our generation was raised, I've talked about this with my friends before, with parents who were all about follow your dreams. That was the motto that like lots of the people from my generation were brought up with because, you know, our parents, things, not to say that they didn't struggle, but things I think seemed a little easier to put together in terms of family life and career. So we were all raised with this follow your dreams thing. My parents said that all the time.
I say that all the time.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to say to people, but it's also very impractical.
You got to be realistic, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to be able to live a practical life too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my parents were like, live your dreams, and I was like, I'm going to be a writer, and then I got to Montreal, and it was a lot more complicated and political than I anticipated it would be. And you know, they were very, very like concerned about me for a while. They were kind of like, are you going to be okay? Like, what are your plans? And I was like, I don't know. I'll figure it out, I guess.
Yeah. I guess the goal of Metatron, at least initially, was to reflect the sensibilities, these kind of sensibilities. Maybe you could expand on that a bit.
I always saw it as like an archival project in a way, where this writing was happening and it wasn't being published, and I was really interested in archiving it first and foremost in the format of books.
What is it again? You're interested in archiving this kind of writing. What kind of writing is it?
It's hard to define, I guess. I'd say that lots of the work I'm really interested in is it's personal, and it's trying, like, I guess I'm really interested in how the minds of this generation are thinking and what they're feeling and how they're responding to the world around them. So like when I look at a book, I really would like for it to conjure like this time and place in the future. Like I love the idea of someone picking up a collection of our books like 50 years from now and being like, oh, of course this was like 2018. Like you can feel it in the book.
This captures it perfectly.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far to say perfectly, but I think that it captures the emotional center of millennials.
Okay. I was pushing you to say perfectly.
Really?
Because now I'm not 100% sure about how to pronounce her name. Rupi Kaur?
Yeah, Rupi Kaur.
Rupi Kaur.
Yeah.
Milk and Honey has sold 1.5 million copies. Does that capture the sensibility of your generation?
Oh, well, not of our generation, no. If you want me to talk about Rupi, I have a lot of feelings about her. I think it's great that poetry is being read by millions of people. You know, her work is more in the tradition of like romantic literature in a way, where it's more about love and loss, which is something that lots of people can identify with.
So you don't think it's trash?
I don't think it's trash. There is a conundrum there with like the quality of the poetry. But it's, you know, Rupi is a poet that is straight from Instagram. You know, like she had a huge following on Instagram before she became huge. So it's this whole new yeah, I think that she kind of represents this, like, I don't know how to put it, but post-social media poet. You know, we don't have to wait for people to publish us anymore. We can publish ourselves and be in control of that in a whole new way. And I think it's quite exciting. I think it's easy to turn our nose down on anyone who ever has a mass level of success, especially as a poet, because poets aren't supposed to be successful. You know, poets are supposed to be on the fringes. And do you think that has anything to do with people's dislike of Rupi? That she just got really famous? Is that the problem?
Well, there's always going to be a bit of jealousy or envy around someone who's achieved huge success. I guess the question is the quality of the work itself. Is, in my opinion, it's drivel. But it's obviously hit a chord.
I think what's really exciting about Rupi is I was teaching in creative writing workshops in high schools this winter in Montreal, and trying to get them excited about poetry, and was bringing some of the works that we've published. And the last couple classes I brought Rupi into the class, and I was teaching it was an all-girls school, and they already knew about Rupi, and they were like super excited. They loved her, and their love for her made them more open to experiencing other poetry. So there's like, one
it's a door opener. That's one good way of putting it.
And I think that Rupi Kaur is more for like that younger generation. I think it's more like, even like I feel too old to read her sometimes, although when I was going through a breakup, there were a few poems of Rupi Kaur's that like really, really like, I like felt them, And she's also a great performer as well, which is something that I also really look for in writers that I work with. Is I like people who know how to like engage with their work and to like connect it with a live audience. Who believe in their work. Exactly. Yeah.
So if she was one of those 30 that had submitted work to you for Metatron. Maybe not. You're like shaking your head. I'm like, what do I say? I mean, to be fair, like Sarah Sutherland, who's an author I've worked with quite a bit. I've done 3 of her. Well, we reprinted. It was I Wanted to Be the Knife was a chapbook at first, and then it sold really, really well. And then we reprinted it. This one, Under Your Recorder, is the second version of this. And then we did Baby. You designed the cover on that.
I made it happen. The author had a very specific idea of like what she wanted.
Okay.
Which is also another part about the press, is that I love for the authors to be involved in what their books look like.
Sure.
But Sarah's very similar. She's a little bit more explicit than Rupi Kaur, but like her work does very, very well on the internet. So I don't know. Would I have published Rupi? Who knows?
Okay, we'll leave that. We'll leave that definitive response is what we'll do. You gave me a selection of about 5 or 6 books, and from what I read, there's all sorts of references to movies and popular culture, which funnily enough, I understood because I took my children, my girls, to a lot of these, bought whatever it was, or watched the movies, or... Is this a kind of a nostalgia for that time that's coming out in these...
That's an interesting point. It's true. Yeah, Senna, well, yeah, I guess it could be. I think there is this sense of frustration with how fast media works these days. Yeah, like of the 2 books, like Senna, actually, lots of the writers I work with actually aren't necessarily like full-time writers. They also do other work. So Senna is I believe a media studies student. Like she studies film.
Senna Yi.
Yeah. Senna
How
Yi.
Do I Look? That was my favorite.
Yeah, that's a fantastic. So that's one of our new ones.
Cover is terrific.
Yeah, the covers are so fun. I think another, important aspect of Metatron is that I really wanted to make like good looking books, and yeah, as I said, like involve the artists in realizing them. Whenever I take on a manuscript, there's always the conversation where it's like, send me, a bunch of photos of books you like, of images you're inspired by, of colors. Everyone has been super happy with their covers so far, because I think it's a shame when you have a book come out and you don't like how it looks and then you have to promote it.
It's interesting with the starting off as a reading series, looking at this commercially, you had a kind of a built-in focus group there, didn't you?
I guess so. What do you mean by focus group, though?
Well, I mean that friends of yours and people that you invited to participate in this series, they would present their work, and you'd automatically know what kind of reception it got.
That's true. And I love doing readings. Like, I wouldn't still be organizing them if I didn't. They're always, they're always free. And
you've done about 50 of them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We did 50. That Blue Mat one that you went to was the 50th one that we'd done.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot. So featured, close to 200 different writers. And, that's, for me, like, that's really great information, to see someone perhaps who I'm interested in publishing and to see how they're able to represent their work is that's always like very helpful in a way, to see how people respond to it. Because, I'm very interested in publishing work that people feel connected to. And not everyone, since lots of like, especially the newer books are a lot about like identity politics, not everyone's going to relate to that. But if it's written in a way that people can get into there and empathize, I think that's a very powerful thing.
Some of the great publishing houses, and in fact, Canada's greatest ever publisher, Jack McClelland, said that he published authors, not books. Mm-hmm. And so I guess with these reading series, you could get a real sense of the person, the author, and how confident they were in their own material.
Yeah, because especially small press publishing, like every book I decide to take on, like I enter a relationship with a person. It's important for me that I'm working with people who share similar, not the same values and beliefs as me, but somewhat, people who operate with the same sense of, like respect. And I don't know, I also like pushing the envelope a little bit. So people who are a little like edgy, I'm not like super, like I'm very open-minded with like who it is I work with, but.
So you don't just restrict it to identity politics then. For example, like a lot of the books that you sent me, there are gay colored people, there are trans people, there are, like, are you limiting it to intersectionist?
Right, like
or feminist, or like are you trying to give them a voice, I guess, or a space?
Yeah.
But are you doing that, like, are you focusing on that or not?
So Metatron definitely started with like a heavy focus on publishing women, and then, I think eventually I realized that wasn't enough. Like I feel like I'm really interested in creating space for people who have different perspectives to offer. So I think publishing, what am I trying to say? Give me a second here to pause.
Sure.
I'd say the last couple years I've really shifted in my thinking in terms of what kind of writers, people I'm interested in supporting. What I've come to the conclusion with is that I want to be publishing perspectives that other people aren't necessarily focusing on, or that have been underrepresented in the history of literature.
So are you doing this to the exclusion of straight white men and women?
No, definitely no.
Okay.
I'm not trying to exclude anyone. Okay. I think my interest was when I first started Metatron, I noticed that the submissions the first couple years were coming mainly from white, straight people. And that worried me because I wanted to be reading and choosing from a diversity of manuscripts, as well as I wanted, with our readings and with the community, I wanted to be making a space that like many people felt safe and supported in. So, I really feel like that's
treated equally.
Treated equally, yeah. And I think that there's a whole other layer of Metatron that's like my sort of like, I'd say activism, or I'm trying to make a change in the world in that way as well. I want the press to have like a diversity of different perspectives.
Sure. Sex. All over those books you sent me.
Yeah, there's a lot of, our books are kind of, or they're pretty smutty, sexual, but they're also written by people in their 20s.
Yeah.
I
can remember that.
Yeah, and it's, and it's something that I feel like I always like worry when people from older generations read our books, because they're either going to like hate them, I
didn't hate them at all.
Because there is like, they're kind of explicit,
Yeah, that was my question was, like sex doesn't shock me at all. But it seems to me that maybe they're trying to be shocking. I don't know, maybe not. And I do, I know that sex just dominated my life for, years, or at least the thoughts about it. But this is nothing new. And why the emphasis on it? Is it just because they're all in their 20s and they're super horny?
I don't know. You know what? I actually think that, I wonder if you could like offer some musings on this too, but I feel like one effect of the internet and social media is that privacy is really different now. You know what I mean? Our ideas of privacy are very different. And, you're right to say that it's not new that writers are writing about sex, like Henry Miller and like, the whole history of that, Anne and the City Lights poets.
Interesting you should mention City Lights, because your books remind me of their books, that kind of square.
Yeah, I was actually inspired by them when I was trying to figure out the format of them. I loved the idea of them being small. Yeah, I don't know about why the fascination with sex, but I think it's just a big part of people's lives, and it's, usually pretty private, but it doesn't need to be.
I'm debating whether or not to bring this up, but...
Go for it.
I'll go for it. I sent you a poem.
Yes.
I thought it was a terrific poem.
Yeah, I loved it. Actually, I'm going to pull it up and have a look at it.
Yeah, that's good, because I want to remember her name.
Let's have a look here. Published on Boat Press, which is a great press, that I just kind of... Actually, last night I was looking at them. Lynn Melnick, The Night of the Murdered Poets.
That's right, okay. So Lynn Melnick, The Night of the Murdered Poets. In it, she talks about her menstrual cycle, and the fact that might have been her first poem or one of the first poems, right?
Right.
So I was reminded of the fact that at that reading that I went to, you talked about your menstrual cycle.
I did. It's so embarrassing, but yeah, I did. I mentioned that I was on my period.
So I was trying to get at, is this shock value, or is it trying to normalize a behavior that women have been made to feel embarrassed and ashamed of for years, and you're just trying to normalize it?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's more that. I think just the more we talk about things that are supposed to or have been kept private, I'm really interested in that. And I think, another thing I think is important about this is that vulnerability to me is like very golden. Like when writers can be vulnerable in their work and write about things that are kind of hard to talk about or even to hear, I think those are like the topics I'm really interested in exploring, because I think that it opens up an opportunity for readers and for the public to engage in hard to talk about topics. So yeah, I think you're right to say that, maybe it is an attempt to normalize something that seems very normal to us.
Something that's taboo, or has been.
Yeah.
Although poetry really shouldn't be about, I don't think, making people feel comfortable about talking about.
Making me feel uncomfortable. Yeah, I guess that's a whole other conversation, I think, is what role is poetry serving in contemporary society. we don't have nature poets anymore. Well, there are some, but you know what I mean? Like, poetry is like, I feel like it's a great place to kind of see where people's consciousness is, what we're thinking about. I don't think it's my place to judge what people want to write about. I don't think that poetry should make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable. I think that poetry for me is just this gateway to thinking outside of your own head in ways that can be moving or uncomfortable. But for me, poetry is about getting access to other ways of thinking.
Like what?
Like in a different body, imagining if you're in a different body or in...
That's what literature does, though.
Yeah, exactly.
What about poetry? That's what makes poetry different.
I feel like poetry is more free. I think there's
doesn't have to be logical.
It doesn't need to be logical. I don't know. I guess there's people who say that poetry is harder to write than fiction, and there's people who think otherwise. Like, I've always felt poetry is very natural. One other thing I guess I'd like to say in regards to that is that I think with originally looking back on what I was trying to do with Metatron and the poetry I was choosing to publish is that I was trying to open people's minds to other forms of poetry. What is poetry? Can poetry be exist on Instagram? Can it be a really mundane moment in the grocery store? Can it be, talking about your period? Like, I just think poetry is everything to me. I think it's a space that can encapsulate so many things. And that's why I use the word free to describe it, is that it's this space where we're free to talk about and write about whatever it is that's moving us. What it is that's moving us is a different thing, perhaps generational. Is it sex? Is it a moment in nature? Is it a movie that we watched? But yeah, poetry is it's a way of thinking. It's like a way of responding to the world, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a striving after an understanding that's beyond language, too. Yeah, we use it, I use it to understand who I am and like what I'm feeling, and all we've got to do that with, to think with, is language, and so that's restricting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we're still using it with poetry.
And I think, there's something to be said for, since I work with younger authors who are in their 20s. Your 20s are a time where you're very still like ego-driven, like you are the center of your own universe. And I think, there's a certain maturity that comes with poetry as you age and you realize, you become more of a person of the world as opposed to just a person on your own accord. So I think, our books are reflective of that, and I wouldn't say that it's like high art poetry. I would never say that about our books, but I think there's something like really important in publishing young writers at the beginning of their careers. First book is everything.
Yeah, they'll never forget it, for one thing.
And then our readers are very young, so that's getting them into poetry, and I love that there's like this culture of poetry that people are excited about.
There's a great book that I've recently read called Why Poetry by Matthew Zapruder, and I interviewed him about this. And he's putting together a guide for teachers because he feels that the way it's been taught has been
it's really boring.
Problematic,
and it's very boring too.
Yeah.
Not that poetry always has to be fun.
Do you have some thoughts on how it should be taught?
I actually really struggled when I was working with poetry and voice for a while, as I mentioned earlier on, and I really struggled with how to teach poetry. And I realized that the reason I was struggling is because, for me, poetry is, as I said earlier on, like a way of thinking. You know what I mean? So how do you teach someone or instruct someone to see what's beyond what's in front of them? Write a poem about the tree. Like, what is that like gateway of teaching people how to like see beyond and feel beyond like what it is that's right in front of us? It's very difficult. I don't think I know the answer to that. I don't think it, like reading, I think it would be an assortment of different things, like reading work and then maybe doing, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I have the answer to that.
Well, how do you teach it?
It's always different. It's very like intuitive. You know, I would teach like once a week kind of thing. So I would have time to think about it. So I would, you know, pick a bunch of work that I felt would be appropriate for the age level I was teaching. And I would start the class by, actually one thing I did that worked really well was at the beginning of the class, I got everyone to close their eyes and take a moment to just like be in their bodies. And then I got them to open up their eyes and to write down a bunch of words. So they had like a bunch of words that were just kind of sifting inside themselves on a page. And then, you know, I did some readings, and then, you know, I got them to add words, and then at the end they constructed something kind of linking all their like thoughts together, inspired by that which I had. But I think giving them the space to feel, because poetry is so much feeling and thinking, but feeling. So how do we create learning environments where people are feeling? You know, it's not something that the education system really does.
It's true. It's sort of all business, all logic.
Yeah.
And if they encourage feeling, then they might encourage rebellion, and that's not exactly what they want.
Yeah. So poetry is kind of a dangerous art to get. Not dangerous, but yeah, I understand. I understand.
Well, dangerous, that's what they called Byron, was a dangerous man.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Poetry is very powerful, you know? Words are powerful.
Well, good poetry is, and good poetry is pretty hard to find. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's a hard art, for sure. We were talking about this earlier on, but going into stores and like as we travel, like finding the bookstores and the used, new, and poetry is always the smallest section. You know what I mean? Unless it's like a poetry-focused store.
It is, but the poetry books are so skinny that you can get a hell of a lot of books.
That's true. That's true.
Just to finish it off, what are your dreams for the future?
I have like, I'm kind of in that like dreaming phase right now, where I you know, I'm in this new office and I want to get like a lot more people involved in it.
Young people, or do you want to get some old people too?
I mean, I'd really like, I definitely am in need of mentors. That's something that I've realized like recently, the last 6 years, I haven't had any mentors, and there's like a huge lack of mentors even for like younger writers too. And so
wait a minute, publishing mentors or writing mentors?
Publishing mentors, like specifically, like I would love to make this sustainable. I'd like to keep on going. I'd like to keep growing, doing more books, doing them better, moving more units, having them more read. But I've kind of hit a point, because most of this has just been the work that I've done. Like I've done most of this on my own. People have come and gone a little bit. But I am kind of in a place now where I realize that I need help. I need help from people who have like done it before. And I think for a long time I didn't want to accept help because of like the story of like why this exists and how it happened. But yeah, now I'm kind of like, come on, mentors. And there are some people who are taking interest in helping me. So yeah, working with more people, making this sustainable, keeping it going is my dream. Be great to win some awards. Who knows what kind of award, like our books, you know, they're not, it's like, it would need like a whole new award system.
Yeah. Well, three of the great publishers in Canada, Stan Bevington, Tim Inkster, Andrew Steeves.
All men.
All white men.
Yeah.
They can be mentors, though.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm open.
Great. Well, we'll put the call out and
hit me up.
check in another 10 years or so.
That sounds great.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
I have been talking to... Now, it's funny, the name that you want to go by is Ashley Obscura.
That's actually like my mother's maiden name. And I've like the last year I've been adapting it and wanting to use that as my name now.
As opposed to...
Opheim, which is my dad's name, which is Norwegian. Yeah, but my mom is Mexican, and Obscura is like Spanish from Spain.
Atlas Obscura.
Yeah, I love Atlas Obscura.
Me too.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah. And this is Metatron, and we're in the new offices in Montreal. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.